Mahalaya. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beth Galella from Bristol-Myers Squibb and a member of the Pediatric Working Group. And on behalf of the Pediatric Working Group, I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today. Dr. Anjali Agrawal holds a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She is currently working as a director of oral product in drug product development group at Bristol-Myers Squibb. She is a strategic formulation director and global project leader with more than 20 years experience in discovery support, pre-formulation, formulation process development, scale-up and technical transfer that enable clinical studies and commercialization of oral and parenteral drug products for NCEs, pediatrics, and product line extension. Prior to joining BMS, Anjali held similar positions at Celgene, Boehringer Ingelheim, Pfizer, and Wyeth. She also served as a CMC lead and global project lead of multiple development compounds being developed for adult and pediatric patients. She's an innovative thought leader with a history of success in designing novel product process approaches, platform formulations, and material sparing predictive methodologies that streamline drug product development and enabled accelerated development of innovative medicines to meet unmet medical needs. She is an active member of AAPS and IQ Pediatric Consortium. She has a passion to develop palatable pediatric dosage form and currently leading initiatives to establish tools for the pediatric drug product excipient selection using risk-benefit metrics in collaboration with the EuPFI Consortium. Dr. Smita Salunke is the Chief Scientific Officer of the European Pediatric Formulation Initiative, EuPFI, and Research Associate at UCL. She has a formulation science background with extensive experience in product development of oral, solid, and liquid dosage forms, project management, product and services management, both from industry and academia. She is the maker of the STEP database and founder of Pediatric Medicine's Healthcare Initiative, nonprofit organization in India. She is currently working on excipients for pediatrics, administration devices, and co-creating wise solutions to global challenges and problems associated with formulating medicines for children in low resource settings. So now I'd like to turn it over to you, Anjali. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Today, myself and Smita would cover various aspects of pediatric excipient selection, mainly focusing on presenting the benefit-risk approach that has been developed by the team. So this effort has been going on for the last couple of years. Essentially, in collaboration, the IQ Pediatric Excipient Subteam and the EuPFI Excipient Subteam has been working, and several team members have contributed towards putting together this framework and the tool which we'll be going through today. So the list of contributors and the key members are mentioned here. So just like to acknowledge that before we get into the thick of the presentation. So moving on, just in terms of the overview, right? Mainly we want to focus on covering the what, the why, and how of excipient. This might seem very simple task, but it can get fairly complicated, especially when we are talking about pediatric drug development. And that's what we are here for today, to get into the different aspects of it and understand the complexities and what can be done. So Smita will cover the what and the why aspect, and later on in the presentation, I'll go through the how aspect of it. That's where to guide the selection of the excipient, the team has developed, the IQ and the EuPFI pediatric team has developed the pediatric risk assessment tool, which is the framework and the heat map decision matrix tool, which can be used to systematically select the excipients. So over to you, Smita, if you can talk about the what and the why.
Yes, thanks, Anjali. Thanks for walking through the overview of our presentation today. So first of all, thank you very much. Thanks very much all of you for participating in this webinar. I'm glad to see that there is so much of interest in this topic, and this kind of indicates that there is the need of an approach for the risk-benefit assessment and the efforts to address the question on how to assess the benefit-risk assessment of excipients in pediatrics. How do we select the excipients for pediatric populations. I hope we will be able to answer some of your questions today through this risk assessment framework. So to begin with, I'll start with a bit of background for our newbies who have been just introduced to this topic or have just newly started with the pediatric product development. So I'll go through the what's and whys of the excipient. And you all may appreciate that the excipients are the integral part of almost every medicinal product. Now, we need excipients to convert our active pharmaceutical ingredients. Next one, please, Anjali. To convert our active pharmaceutical ingredients into an administrable dosage forms, that is the medicine, oral medicine. So basically, they are added into the medicinal product to enhance the physical performance, to facilitate the drug delivery, to increase the product stability, preservation, and overall ensuring the development of the efficacious medicines for our patients. Okay. The excipients play a very, very critical role in the safety profile of the product. Okay, it is now very well acknowledged that the excipients are not inert, as the old definition may have suggested. The definition of the excipients have evolved. Okay, and now it is defined as any ingredient or a constituent that's there in your medicinal product apart from the active ingredient and which has been appropriately evaluated for the safety. Okay, some excipients are associated, we all aware of it, that some excipients are associated with the serious side effects. They can exert the adverse effects on the individuals with the known sensitivity, intolerances, and this can be especially very complicated when it comes to the vulnerable pediatric population. Okay, considering the developing physiology that they have, the way they handle any xenobiotics would differ to that of an adult. Okay, and hence the characterization of the safety, toxicity, hazard in a dynamic system of this developing physiology system is very, very important. It is important that you identify the risks and carefully select the excipients for the pediatric population. Okay, there are current regulatory expectations, regulatory guidelines that suggest that the choice of the excipients should be justified, and then the selection of these excipients should be based on the thorough assessment of risk associated with the safety, quality, efficacy, and the function of the excipients. Okay, the EU 2003 guideline did mention that the excipients are generally considered to be inert, but it is desirable that the excipient should have little or no pharmacological action. However, some have recognized actions or effect in certain circumstances. The 2013 guideline did say that you need a comprehensive development rationally, considering the relative benefit risks of possible alternatives. So you have to always look into the alternatives, avoid the excipients with potential cause of concern, and justify the value of a novel excipient. Okay, so there are the regulatory guidelines around it, which does suggest that in general, the consideration of the excipients selection during the product development include, if you go further, so if you look into there, is in general, when you are looking into the excipient selection, or when you have to select the excipients for your product development, you would look into first of all, the compatibility with the API, the physical properties of the excipients, suitability of the excipients, mechanical properties, and then the safety data in the animals, humans, the impurities, the residuals that were there. So you look into the safety data of all this when you have to select the excipients in general. And of course, then the global use of the excipient, the supply chain, and so on, which kind of indicates the acceptability of these excipients in general. But then what is different in pediatrics? So what are the different elements that you need to consider when it comes to the pediatric drug development? So the first question that you need to be really asking yourself is it really needed? I mean, we need to have a very strong rationale. That was mentioned in the guideline as well. We need to have a very strong rationale for including an excipient into a pediatric product. Then comes it needs to have a very strong safety toxicity data in the desired age group that you're planning to prepare the pediatric formulation for. So when it comes to the safety data, the most important aspect is the amount of the excipient. So look into the acceptable daily intake, the safety limits that are available for the excipient. Is there any safety data available in the juvenile animals? animals, and then the human safety data. That's whatever data is available. Is very, very important to look into all that information, to look into the impact on the ADME of the API, impact on the overall pediatric drug development. So these are the aspects that you need to consider differently when it comes to the pediatrics. And then, as I said, the suitability, acceptability in terms of that, the specific aspect that you need to consider when it comes to pediatrics is this test, sensitization, the impurity levels, and then the effect that it would have on the targeted pediatric age range. Okay, so these are the aspects that you would need to look into when it comes to, especially to the pediatric drug development. Now, the regulatory guidelines has a section on the guideline on the pharmaceutical development of medicines for pediatric use. They do have a section dedicated to the excipients, and they do suggest that when it comes to selection of the excipients for pediatric, you need to link it to the use and the function. You need to look into the factors such as the target age group, the pharmaceutical formulation, route of administration, daily intake, composition, severity of the disease, and so on. So you need to look into all these factors. It also gives the hierarchy of the information sources that need to be consulted to assess the safety profile of the excipient, okay, resulting into the overall conclusion whether or not you need the additional data or the information that you've gathered is sufficient enough to justify the safety of the excipients that you've been selected. The other one is the FDA guidelines that also kind of suggest that you need to perform the risk-benefit assessment on the proposed new excipient in the drug product to establish the safe limits. Okay, the existing human data can be a substitute for certain non-clinical safety data. So you need to look into all that when you have to select the excipients. Okay, and if you go just the next slide, so the risk-based approach is kind of advocated by the FDA, by the EMA guidelines, and by the regulators. However, not everyone agrees on how you select the excipients or conduct this risk assessment. There is no kind of appropriate guideline or the guidance. There are the factors or there are the considerations that have been listed, but there is no systematic or there is no process or approach that has been so far. That's kind of is lacking in the domain on how you select it, how you go on about this process, and this is where there are, so that's fine, Anjali, it's okay. So this is where there are few, we have been looking into and digging into the literature to see what's available, what's the current practice, what are the current knowledge in terms of assessing the risk-benefit assessment. So this is one of the recent, not very recent, but recent article that was published by PERA, where they looked into the current practices. And if you look into it, is what are the regulatory challenges and perspectives when it comes to the excipients. And the article was based on the novel excipients, but they did mention that the prioritization on how people select the excipients is that the prioritization of the excipients is based on the prior use in the drug product and food and cosmetics. And the overall aim is to avoid the additional risks or the delays that could be associated in the approval of this new drug product, as well as to maintain the low development cost. So if you look into the site here, there is this priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it starts with the excipients previously used in the identical route of administration at the same or higher concentration. Then the second priority would be excipient previously used in the identical route, but lower concentration than in the newer products, so it will be a slightly higher. So only limited, in that case, only limited or additional preclinical evaluation is needed. So they do have the prioritization kind of types, but then the reason associated on why people use this approach when they prioritize or select the excipients in the drug development. Okay, the other approach, but however, before I move into that one, the complication which I did or which is associated with this is that with use of excipients in the previous drug product is that implementing such practices does not necessarily consider all the potential risk associated with the excipients. The benefit risk may differ for one product to the other product depending upon the severity of the disease, the age that the product was for, the route of administration, and other factors. So, and in fact, sometimes we do look into the food as well. So there are some excipients, the excipients may share some risk to food, but then there are additional risks associated with the pharmaceutical formulations in terms of the function, the formulation, manufacturing aspects, composition, or the variation of the excipient characteristics. So all this need to be considered, which is not considered in the food. So you need to consider it separately when it comes to the pharmaceutical formulation. So these aspects need to be taken into consideration, and we can't just prioritize the excipients on the basis of the previous use in the previous products. Okay, so that's where another one that we did come across during our literature is the approach which has been suggested by Rubin and group. So what they suggest is just to start with the dosage form. So you start the risk associated with the dosage form, and depending upon that, then you look into the age group that you are the product has been used into, and then if you look if whether it is a systemic or whether it is a local, the product is intended for ingestion and so on, and depending upon that basis, they have associated the high, medium, and low risk to it. But when you consider the dosage form, we need to look into the aspect that same excipient may be the component of various dosage forms. And when I say that, for example, if you take propylene glycol, it could be used as co-solvents in injection, but it can be also used as solvents in the oral liquids, which are administered at the same time or concomitantly with the neonates, or it could be used as a plasticizers in the tablet coating. So the same excipients may be the component of the different dosage forms. So it's very important that you look into the dosage forms when you are evaluating the risk for the excipients. Okay, this approach further suggests then assessing the criticality of the excipient's function, okay, and then the impact that it would have on the critical quality attributes of the product. So, for example, if you're changing a filler, would that affect the solubility of the product? Would that affect the hardness of the product? So that is something you need to look into, is that when you're assessing the function of the excipient, will it impact the other critical quality attributes, and will it ultimately impact the product performance? So that are the aspects you need to consider. And then finally, very important is the daily intake of excipients. So the excipients are there in various amounts in the pharmaceutical dosage forms, and that again depends upon the age, the dosage, and so on. And the daily intake may vary. So it is important to compare the maximum daily intake to the ADI, to the safety limits. Okay, and the challenge here is to really interpret the limits in when it is in the clinical use, when you're doing the clinical decision. It's really challenging to interpret this limits. The hospital units may be exposed to numerous distinct medications, and what happens is the ADI affecting this physiological growth or affecting the organ development, they may only become evident in the long-term follow-up studies. So it's very important to look into all this when they have to make this clinical decision, and that's not available to them. So how do then they make this risk assessment? So all these factors we need to take into consideration to make the informed decision, which evaluates then the effectiveness of the formulation or the effectiveness of the medicine that the clinician is prescribing to the patient. And all this needs a systematic approach of the systematic use of the information to help assess, estimate, or to help evaluate the risk, identified risk in the product. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, please, Anjali. So what do we do is, in the process of this risk assessment, is we look into all these different information sources, because that is required to do the thorough risk assessment. So apart from the hierarchy that's been given in the guideline, we also look into the additional information sources, as in excipient manufacturers. We would go into the company databases, the pharmacopoeias, FDA database, and so on, and the STEP database, of course, and look into all this information sources to find the information to make us to help us with the risk assessment of the excipient. However, if you go forward, there are the challenges in terms of utilizing this information. And as I said, once you've collected all this information, how are you going to utilize this information? And that is the important thing, is that we need a systematic approach to systematically evaluate all this collected information to help us within the systematic risk assessment process. So this is the slide which I've picked up from the workshop that we did in 2016 along with the IQ, and so this was a workshop based on the excipient selection, and we collected the input from different members, the participants of this workshop. And the key points that came out from this workshop was that we need to start early. We need to justify the role and the need of the excipient, engage the regulatory partners as early as possible. Okay, and we need to look into the excipient evaluation as a context-specific evaluation and not a blanket assessment of each excipient. Okay, and then we need to leverage the existing data from the food industry and so on, as we said. So make as much as the use of the data, but then use the and do the systematic analysis of this data, and which is where we really need this framework, systematic framework, so that we can utilize this information systematically and make this appropriate decisions. And this is what again came up from the workshop there, is that we need a structured benefit risk assessment framework to help us with the product development, to help us with the decision making, and so on. And not only that, but it will keep you with the transparent dialogue between the transparent communication between the stakeholders, or between the people involved in this process, including the regulators, the developers, the formulators, toxicologists, and at every stage of this development, it will maintain that transparency in the communication. So that was the gap which was identified at this workshop, and then hence we kind of came up with this action plan that we need to develop a framework which will be very transparent, communicate, and which will help us to systematically assess the benefit risk assessment. So going to the next slide, and this is where then we have pulled in together, and we have now developed the framework and a tool which provides this qualitative method for the selection of the excipients. But not only that, but it allows you with the rapid screening and prioritization of the excipients going forward. But now when we were developing this framework, it is just not the framework that we have put in together just the way it is. We actually went through a very detailed methodology to do this. So there is extensive thought process that has gone through the development of this framework. We've come, first of all, we gathered the information required for the excipient selection and the expectations from the supplier. So in 2012, a questionnaire survey was done with among the group of the pharmaceutical industry, representatives from the UK, USA, India, Europe, where we collected the information which is required for the appropriate selection of the excipients for the pediatric, and then the sources, information sources that have been used by this. And in both years, you can see here, the blue one is the is 2019, and then the red bars are the 2012. So in both years, a similar proportion of the companies actually require the information on the acceptable daily intake, the toxicity data, safety toxicity data, previous use in the pediatric products. Sorry, I'm just getting closer because it's a bit small. Sorry about that. So it was a similar information that was been required. But if you look into the information on the excipient ADI, impurities, country restrictions, adverse events, then this was also expected by such type of information was expected from the suppliers. Okay, so the information provided from these two surveys that we did in 2012 and 2019 gave us some insight into the company's information requirement, what do the companies require, and what sources they're referring to. And this is what kind of help us to then, make the framework and consider these aspects in our framework. The second step then what we did was we organized a workshop as part of the EuPFI 2018 conference. And at this workshop, we looked into the different practices employed by the companies in terms of selecting the excipients and in terms of doing the risk assessment. And we identified the questions we should be considering during the selection process. So we kind of did a scenario based where we had the fictitious case studies, and this were given to the participants, and we asked participants on what is their approach, what practice do they employ in their companies to select the excipients. So would you select this, would you select that? And depending upon the discussion that we had in this workshop, which was very useful, we came up with a list of common questions which we need to be, I wouldn't say, questions which need to be answered when we have to select the excipients for pediatrics. So that goes to the next slide, Anjali, please. There you go. So that's where it is. So we came up with a very nice questionnaire set, which we need to ask ourselves when we have to select the excipients. And the questionnaire set that you see here is we give the list of the questions, but we have the list of the questions that need to be asked differently when we are developing a pediatric product, or the additional questions that you would ask yourself when you are considering the novel excipients. So we came up with this unique question sets for the pediatric or for the novel excipients that we need to come up. And this questionnaire set then further helped us to develop this framework, which would be very easy to use for our participants. So next slide, please. So that's the framework that we have now developed with the IQ and the EuPFI. And I give it over to Angelina to go through to details about this framework and explain how this framework works and at what stages you would be using this framework with a beautiful case study that we have prepared to present that. So, Dharon, over to you, Anjali.
Thanks, Smita. Thanks for providing that nice overview and the background information of what is currently being done in the industry. So as Smita mentioned, we identified the need that there is not a systematic evaluation being done currently in order to select the excipients. So the IQ and the EuPFI team members worked together and they collated the information that was gathered from the survey, from the workshop, and essentially established a model which is presented here. It's Pediatric Excipient Risk Assessment called as PERA model. So if you look at this, the diagram or the figure here, essentially the assessment is being presented in a tiered approach. So in tier 1, which is the risk identification stage, this is a stage of gathering the information. So to systematically gather all the information, the main attributes that should be considered are broken down into 3 categories, namely patient attributes, dosage form and dosing attributes, and excipient attributes. So patient attributes is very critical, as you can imagine, because we're talking about the pediatric population. So various factors such as age range, disease type and severity, dosing regimen, dose range, and also co-medication and preconditions should be considered. So each of these factors dictate your choice of the dosage form and also what excipient should be selected. So one thing I would like to highlight here is, although just to aid in the process of gathering the information, we have categorized these attributes into 3 categories: patient attributes and the dosage form and excipient. Each of these attributes, they can correlate or they are relatable to each other. So if one attribute changes, that might affect the other selection process in terms of the dosage form and the excipient attribute. So when we're gathering this information and doing the risk analysis, all of the information should be looked at it holistically. So coming to the dosage form and the dosing attributes, the route of administration, that dictates the need of what excipients to be selected depending on the route, and also the risk also varies based on the route of administration. As you can imagine, if we are talking about parenteral route, the risk of any excipient could be much higher as opposed to the oral because of the direct impact it can have being it in the bloodstream. So route of administration weighs in very heavily. Similarly, the other factors like the dosage form type, whether it's a single or multiple units, dosing approach. So often to aid the palatability or swallowability in children, the dosage form is given with either the vehicles like the food or the liquid vehicles. So the compatibility of the excipients with these vehicles also should be assessed or kept in mind. So for some cases, when you need to use the food or the vehicle, certain excipients may degrade and may affect the functionality of the dosage form, which will in turn affect the safety and the efficacy. So again, all these factors could be interrelated, so needs to be taken into account holistically. Similarly, the packaging and delivery device, although it's purely a dosage form related aspect, but there could be an interaction between the excipients with the certain packaging and the delivery device. And if those interaction leads to any harmful degradant, then that needs to be taken into account, and that weighs into the risk analysis. Other aspects are environment of use. Geographical area of use can dictate the dosage form effectiveness if a certain excipient is not selected carefully. For example, if we are developing ODT tablets where the effectiveness of the orally disintegrating tablet could be minimized in a tropical area where the humidity is high. So in those kind of dosage form, we have to avoid selecting a hygroscopic excipient. Of course, you can use packaging to avoid any harmful changes in the drug product, but packaging is considered as a last resort. So during the formulation stage itself, if the users or the formulators are mindful of selecting the right combination of excipient and the dosage form attribute, that really helps to build a robust product. So that's why environment of use is also listed as one of the factor here. The main category is the excipient attribute. So as Smita mentioned, with coming to, it's applicable to adult formulation also, but coming to the pediatric, the function of the excipients, even though it's already called out in the adult formulation, by developing a pediatric formulation, we have to relook at it, make sure that each and every excipient has a defined function and its use is justified. Because when regulatory agencies are looking at it, they are more only looking at it about the harmful aspects of it. What harm can this excipient cause in a certain age group, especially when we're talking about a neonate or very young age population. Each and every excipient use has to be justified based on the function, and the level also should be kept to the minimum. Again, it varies depending on the age range because the maturity in the children varies with the age group. So these factors are again interrelated. So depending on the age range that you're targeting for your patient population, the function, the level, and the ADI, everything needs to be assessed accordingly. The acceptable daily intake, as Smita mentioned, there are several resources that can be tapped into to do that thorough assessment. It's not straightforward, but there are several resources, and it's again a holistic assessment needs to be done depending on the country of use that the sponsor is targeting. If it's for global administration, then we have to consider multiple regulations. Similarly, global regulatory acceptability needs to be considered, especially for products that are aimed for the global use. Another important aspect in terms of the excipient attribute is prior use in pediatric products. So this can be leveraged effectively to justify the excipient use in addition to ADI, and sometimes if ADI information is not available, prior use in pediatric products, while using that case to justify, one has to be mindful about how it relates to the patient attributes. The current product that is being developed, if it matches in terms of the dosing regimen, age regimen, disease type and severity, then that using that prior product as an example can be helpful for the justification. If it's very different, then it may not be a strong justification. Other aspects for the excipient attributes are the impurities. So in addition to the main excipient, we have to be mindful about what impurities might be present in a certain grade of the excipient. So that's where the dialogue between the supplier and thoroughly reviewing that information from the COFA was very helpful. Safety and toxicity aspect is mainly about the juvenile toxicity. Either it could be an animal study or the human data that might be available. And again, here, several databases can be utilized to map out that information, namely the STEP database and the ToxNet and the others, the databases. So these are mainly focusing on the safety aspect of it. The other aspect or the excipient attributes is the physical, chemical, and biopharmaceutical properties. Because excipients are used to garner certain function in a dosage form, we have to be very mindful. Can the certain physical, chemical properties provide the desired stability, manufacturability, or functionality? If you're going for a site-specific action type of dosage form, can any changes in the physical, chemical, or biopharmaceutical property affect that? And does that cause any safety and efficacy risk or the toxicity risk? So those factors need to be taken into account. So overall, all these attributes, information should be gathered in tier 1, which is the risk identification stage, and then the thorough risk analysis is conducted. Now, we do realize that these are quite a few factors, and to systematically conduct the risk analysis, that's where a tool has been developed, which is essentially a heat map decision matrix tool. I'll go into the detail of the tool and demonstrate the applicability by a case study in the next few slides. But just wanted to show you that this is how in tier 2 the risk analysis can be conducted in a very systematic way, and the gaps can be identified. And to mitigate those gaps, the third step is the risk management, which is the coming up with an action plan. So depending on the risk, whether it's a high risk or if the gaps cannot be mitigated, if that's what the analysis indicates, then usually the formulator or the users might select an alternate excipient, or they might modify the formulation approach so that the need for that particular excipient is eliminated. If an excipient is needed, if the decision is it's needed to be kept in the formulation, then the team focuses on conducting the gap mitigation studies, such as any PK/PD studies or bridging with human PK data, or any specific excipient kinetic study or safety assessment that could be done. So when we are coming up the mitigation studies, that's where I think having that regular or constant dialogue with the regulatory bodies is important, so that the mitigation strategies are discussed and agreed upon and can be used effectively while submitting the dossier. So moving on to the step 4, which is the utilization of a tool now to conduct the systematic assessment while to guide the selection of the excipient. So as shown here, essentially, it's a simple Excel format that we have built, and all the factors that I went through in the previous slide on the framework has been captured. And then a heat map is generated when the excipients are being compared side by side to identify the gaps or the risk. So the approach that will be taken is you look at the patient attributes, select the age-appropriate dosage form, compare potential formulations containing different excipients using PERA tool and select acceptable excipients, or establish the risk mitigation plan, proceed forward with the formulation and process development studies, and then come back and confirm based on the data whether the excipient that is selected is suitable or not, and whether the quantities are within the acceptable limit. So what I'm trying to highlight here is it's not like the risk assessment is one time done and never look back. It's a continuum process. It's used at the start of the development work, and again it should be looked at as we are finalizing the formulation components and the level to ensure that we are within the risk profile, and the data that is generated can be used to justify it for the selection of a particular excipient. So this is the other way of showing what goes into the PERA tool. I know this slide is quite busy, but the main purpose of showing this slide is just to show that how the information is captured in the tool. So patient information, all aspects about the patient and indications are captured, which guides the proposed formulation, and which ultimately guides towards the proposed type and level of excipient. And then once the users identify what type of excipients they want to use, then converting that level of excipient information to body weight, normalized weight is important. And then a thorough assessment is done for the safety, toxicity, dosing attributes, and the physicochemical bioform properties. As you can see from the flow chart here, the safety toxicity is the major one, and it has multiple factors affecting into it. So all these have been collated in the tool to help with the systematic assessment. Other important attributes are dosing attributes, because in addition to safety, the functionality of the dosage form could get affected if appropriate excipients are not selected, namely palatability or irritation at the site of injection. Physicochemical properties also are important, like I was just sharing an example of orally disintegrating tablets for ODT. Having an excipient which is non-hygroscopic would be desirable, just to have ensure the functionality of the dosage form. So those are some of the aspects, key aspects that are mapped out in the tool. So let's look at the case study. So here, to demonstrate the usability of the PERA framework and the PERA tool, in the publication that we are putting it out, several case studies will be laid out. One case study will be focusing on the established excipients. Another one is focusing on the novel excipients, and the third one is the route of administration, that is IV route, and also the age group, that is neonate. Now, in the interest of time, I won't be able to go through each of the case studies. So today I will cover only case study 1, where the PERA tool is used to select between 2 bulk sweeteners, sucrose and mannitol, for an oral mini tablet formulation containing an amorphous solid dispersion as an active ingredient. So essentially, the approach here is to leverage the adult formulation, and which is typically quite common in any industry, any pharma industry, is to leverage the adult formulation while developing the pediatric formulation as much as possible. So let me just jump right into the case study. So here, first, let me walk you through how it's constructed, right? So the first section is patient and treatment attributes. So here, all the information about the patient and the treatment is laid out, which ultimately guides the next steps in terms of the proposed formulation and the excipients. So the age range, the indication, and the type of disease severity, the body weight range, the route of administration, what those strengths we are talking about, what is the proposed dosage form, what is the dosing regimen, whether it's a QD or twice a day or once a week, that needs to be articulated here. And then ultimately the API, what's the dose level we are talking about. So when we're talking about the dose level of the API and also of the excipients, it's important to convert it into mg per kg per day, because normally the dosing in the pediatric population is done based on the body weight. So you need to normalize your units to mg per kg per day, so that way it's easy to compare across. If you don't do that, then it gets very confusing to compare the information and do the selection properly. So that's the aspects about the patient attributes. In terms of the formulation, here in this case study, just showing the adult formulation. So adult formulation is leveraged, and then based on some early studies that were done, feasibility studies, it was identified that there is a need to include a sweet diluent. So in this case study, we are comparing mannitol versus sucrose. But one more thing I want to highlight is, just because adult formulation, everything looked good for adult population, let's not assume that it will be good for the pediatric population. Each and every excipient in an adult formulation needs to be looked at again in terms of whether it's safe for pediatric population for the desired age range, for the desired level, and whether it can render the functionality that is needed for pediatric population for the desired age range. So that's why here in this exercise, all the components are mentioned that are present in the formulation, and also the two components that we want to pick from, mannitol or sucrose, are mentioned here. So as we go across the formulation information, function and justification should be included, and then based on the concentration that is being used in the dosage form, convert that concentration into mg per kg per dose, and then ultimately mg per kg per day. It's important when you're doing that conversion, identify what is your worst case scenario, what's your lowest age range, what is the lowest body weight, and then do that conversion. And when you're doing the risk assessment, go with the worst case scenario to compare across, so that way you are covered for the youngest population. So just to put all that information now into the assessment, the heat map matrix. So first off is the safety and toxicity of the excipient. So here the diagram here or the table here is showing for all the excipients that are currently being considered for the pediatric product that is being developed. So if you go down the list, the main thing is considering the regulatory aspect in terms of the acceptability. So finding this information is not straightforward. Let me just put it out there. As many of you might have struggled through it. So it takes time. And that's why being diligent about upfront finding that information before jumping onto the formulation development and doing that thorough analysis is critical. It pays off later on when we are writing the PIP and the PSP and the DOS submitting the dossier. So do the thorough assessment about the regulatory aspect from US, EU, and depending on where the product is being filed, other countries as well, like Canada, Japan, or any other countries. Establish that what is the acceptable daily intake. In some cases, the level that you're proposing might be below what is considered acceptable in various regulatory agencies. Then in that case, the heat map will automatically turn green. In some cases, the information might be inconclusive, or you're above the level that is being proposed, then it might turn yellow if it's unknown or inconclusive. When the level you're proposing is above the acceptable limit, it will become red. So here in this scenario, the ADI information is available for most of the excipients, and if it's not available, generally, then you look at the regulatory labels and the other information that is shared. So for pediatric population, there is quite a bit of information available in terms of certain excipients that are considered in a high risk category, like the PEG, the ethanol, the preservatives. So the users are advised to look into all those information before to guide their thorough risk assessment. Another important aspect is prior use in the pediatric product. So the suggestion is look for that information, look for several products. While looking for the product, the important thing is it should match your patient population, the age group, the dosing regimen, and the level, the strength that we are talking about, to be applicable for your thorough risk analysis. So in this scenario, in this case study, 2 products were identified Again, finding that information is not straightforward, but it can be done. And there are product insert and SMPC and other sources that are available, and also some published literature is available which can be leveraged to gain that information. So once you collect that information, put it in the heat map, you get a quick idea about where the gaps are and what needs to be done. Other information in terms of the safety is the juvenile tox studies, either in animals or the humans. So this is where, again, the database, like the STEP database, is very useful. A lot of information is collected there. A lot of good references are collected, so the users can leverage that. And in terms of the safety and toxicity, like I said, in addition to the main excipient, look at the unacceptable components. There might be some unacceptable components that are present in the excipient. So those should be looked at and mentioned, and risk analysis needs to be done even for those components. So continuing on to the risk, mapping out the risk assessment here, the other attributes like the dosing attributes and the physicochemical properties also should be looked at. Like in this case study, in terms of dosing attributes, we picked mainly palatability because that was the main driver. So again, this tool is customizable. Depending on the need, the users can customize and they can build their own tool. You can add more factors if needed as required. Let's say supply chain, if that is critical for considering the business aspect of it. So you can add that to it if that weighs into the decision making. So what we are trying to say is this is not an exhaustive list. These are the most probable factors that could impact the decision making or risk assessment that has been included here. So in this case study, the dosing attributes like palatability was included, and then the physicochemical attributes, any known potential issues, like some excipients are incompatible to strong acid and bases, or incompatible to or are hygroscopic. So those are captured here. So at the bottom, if you look at the holistically, now going into the step 2, which is the risk analysis, this heat map quickly allows to identify where are the gaps, which excipients are acceptable. So going back to our original goal of sucrose versus mannitol. So this heat map indicated that most of the information is available for mannitol and sucrose. ADI is the proposed level is within the ADI limits. There is a market precedence where a higher level is used for one of the product. It's lower level is used for sucrose, but there is another product for which a higher level of sucrose is used. So overall, no significant risk identified for use of either sucrose or mannitol in the pediatric population at the targeted level for a desired age range. The formulation containing sucrose or mannitol were considered comparable, but there are certain other factors that needs to be kept in mind, and which was mentioned in that risk assessment, right? So the other known safety issues. So mannitol is mild laxative effect, but only at very high level, and sucrose can affect the blood glucose level. It's the cardiogenic properties. So those factors were also considered while making a selection. So overall, looking at it holistically, although ADI is good, but considering the cardiogenic properties and so on, mannitol was selected, and it also helps with the manufacturability to make a strong tablet. So in this case study, mannitol was selected as a formulation, as an excipient of choice. Another excipient, since we are looking at the full formulation of the adults, also in addition to the mannitol and sucrose, one risk that was identified was SLS. It was SLS has some bitter taste, and for pediatric population, palatability is one of the critical factor. So the team did look at that, the bitter taste aspect, and what can be done to mitigate it. So overall palatability of the dosage form was enhanced because SLS was serving as a functional excipient. So in this case study, the team chose not to go with a different surfactant, but in reality, if you come across this juncture, again, in terms of your action plan, it could be either you address it in the formulation or you select a different dosage, select a different surfactant or different excipient. So just to wrap up, we hope that we have given you a good glimpse of what are the challenges, and hopefully this framework and the tool can address it. Our next plan is to publish this framework and tool so that it's readily available to all the users. So right now we have the mature draft and the final review is ongoing. So we'll be publishing that, what we have presented here today soon. Also, Smita and myself are planning to conduct a workshop to mainly assess the usability and gain feedback about this PERA framework and tool. So this is not again like one-time done deal. We want to keep on enhancing the framework and tools so that it has maximum usability. So we will be conducting these targeted workshops in various conferences and gain the feedback and accordingly update the framework and the tools. Also, we are planning to develop a web-based PERA tool so that it's freely accessible in the public domain by end of this year. So that's all I had. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. And thank you to IQ for providing us this opportunity to present the work done by the team members, IQ and the EuPFI team members. So if anybody has any questions, I'm pretty sure you must be putting it in the chat box. We can go through it now.
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you, Smita, for a very interesting and informative presentation on excipient selection. We do have a couple questions here. One from the audience. Does FDA approve the pediatric drug application with risk-based justification, and what is the FDA response to it?
You mean the framework that we are presenting, or in general for any filing risk-based justification? Sorry, I forgot. This cannot be a dialogue forum, right? It's
yeah,
just
okay. I mean, yeah, possibly in general, but I think it could be specific to your framework.
Yeah. So in terms of the specific to a product, this approach has been used in terms of justifying the risk. I have an example where vitamin E TPGs in the initial filing, it was questioned by the FDA, and the team went back by exactly providing this risk-based justification and also leveraging the prior product knowledge and sharing that justification of the prior product use. And based on the discussion, then ultimately that approach was taken forward and it was approved. In terms of the general aspects, Smita, do you want to add anything there in terms of our general proposal?
No, I think so. Yeah, I would just add into it saying that the regulators, if there is what they need is they need the justification on the selection of the excipient and the role. You need to justify the role of the excipient. And if you have a systematic risk assessment, then yeah, of course, they would consider that.
Okay, thank you. Is the tool accessible to the industry?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is mainly for the industry to help out and bring consistency across the industry members. That's what the goal is.
Okay, thanks. Assuming there are no alternatives, how do you balance risk and benefit?
Shweta, you want to take that on?
No worries. Yes, I mean, yeah, there are the chances when you are selecting an excipient and you come to a stage where you would use the risk assessment framework, and then you are at the stage at the third stage or tier 3 of this framework where it would say, oh, the action plan is that you either go with an alternative or you do the analysis or the gap, fill in the gaps, and that's where it is. So if you don't have the alternatives, the only option then we are left with is, of course, looking into the severity of the disease. So we can look into the severity of the disease and make the risk benefit analysis on that basis, or we have to then look into filling those gaps. So we need to come up with a very judicious plan in filling up those gaps to help us use that excipient, considering there is no alternative available. If needed, we may need to conduct the studies. But then again, when you have to conduct the studies, you may have to look into what studies are really needed, are really important. So especially when it comes to the juvenile study, is that really needed? Is there something else? You may need to do the PKPD studies or modeling. So you may have to synthesize this new body of knowledge that will be required to fill in those gaps, and then able to use that excipient that you really want to, if there is no alternative.
Okay, thanks. FDA is working on an excipient database for pediatrics, and this person is wondering if anyone from industry is involved with this, if you're aware.
I'm not aware of it. If FDA is specifically working on pediatric, I know they were updating the IID, inactive ingredient database, so that they can have that maximum daily intake MDI information in there. So that they have now all up to date, and it's been rolled out, the IID. Smita, are you aware of it? If they're working on specifically?
I'm afraid, Anjali, even this is a new information for me. That would be very nice if the FDA is also thinking of coming up with a database on excipients for pediatrics. But so far as our understanding or knowledge is, as Anjali said, they're working on the 2D and they were thinking of including the pediatric aspects on it. But I think so in the terms of the priority, that is a bit of on a low priority, and they're focusing more on the maximum daily intake, which they've already updated in it. But no, I don't know anything about this specific database on the excipients for pediatrics being developed by FDA.
Yeah, via the consortium, there is active discussion going on, like within the IT consortium, and the same thing with the EuPFI. But no action has been taken. Like there is no work stream that has been initiated. At least that's what, as of now, we know. There is a novel excipient work stream that is working on it, and somebody can argue that pediatric is a subset of it. But again, in discussion with the health authorities, right now they are focusing on how to qualify those novel excipients, come up with a general process. They are not really focusing on specifically the pediatric aspect. That might come as a step 2 much later, but that's what we know as of now.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have any more time for additional questions, but there are a couple others, and I think we will pass them over to you via email to both of you, so that maybe you can communicate answers following the webinar. So at this time, I would like to thank our audience for all of the wonderful questions and for joining us today. Just to let you know, we will be taking a 2-month summer break from our webinar series, and we'll resume with our next webinar in September on pediatric biopharmaceutics. After we conclude today, you will receive an email, everyone in the audience will receive an email from Mahalaya with a feedback survey. It's very important to the speakers and as also to us as moderators to ensure the quality and value of our webinar series. So we really do appreciate your feedback. And thank you both again very much for presenting for us today. And I will pass it back over to.
We look forward to welcoming you to a future webinar for the pediatric working group and for IQ. Thanks very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for the great questions.
Thanks all the attendees for attending this, and thanks Mahale, thanks Beth for organizing this. Really appreciate your efforts there. Thank you very much. Thanks all, and you have a good day.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.